Hi, I'm Caroline Levitt. I'm the co-founder of Mighty Blaze, the book initiative that began during the pandemic to help authors who lost their tours, bookstores whose doors were shuttered, and readers who just wanted to listen to authors and find out about new books. I am absolutely thrilled to be here today with Ann Leary. I cannot wait to talk about this book, The Foundling. I tore through it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And before I get to Ann's bio, I want to tell you some of the praise. The Washington Post said it was insanely fun, richly satisfying fiction. The New York Times said Leary is a virtuoso. Kirkus Reviews, who's notoriously cranky, gave it a star and said Leary's wit complements her serious approach to historical and psychological issues. This thoroughly satisfying novel. And Publishers Weekly called it gripping, and it's all those things. It's just amazing. The Foundling is also an Indie Next pick and a Library Reads pick. It's about two women, both who have been raised in the same orphanage, but when they meet again, it is as employee and inmate at a woman's asylum in the 1920s. Ann Leary is the author of the New York Times bestselling novel, The Good House, which is soon to be in theaters. It's not in theaters already, right?
No, it's premiering a week from today, I think,
Right.
at the Tribeca Film Festival, which couldn't be more perfect.
Couldn't be greater.
Until a week ago, that was happening.
And it's starring Kevin Kline and Sigourney Weaver. Her modern love piece, Rallying to Keep the Game Alive, was adapted for the Modern Love TV series starring Tina Fey and John Slattery, and her work has been translated in 18 languages. The only other thing I can say about Anne is we once, before we knew each other, we met for lunch at Japonica, and we stayed there 7 hours talking.
Yes.
So welcome, Anne.
I'll never, it's a day I'll
We're so
fascinating. I couldn't, I remember.
We're so thrilled to have you in here. And I also want to say, please support your local indie bookstore. We love at Mighty Blaze bookshop.org, but I'm sure you have your own bookstore. Trust me, you want this book. You absolutely want this book. It's calling to you. You want it. You need it. So, Anne, I am so delighted to have you here. And I want to talk first about, there was a quote in one of your interviews, I believe, for Margaret Sanger. Oh, yeah, you put it in your author's note. It's a quote from Margaret Sanger, which says, every feeble-minded girl or woman of the hereditary type, especially of the moron class, should be segregated during the reproductive period. Otherwise, she is most certain to bear imbecile children who are in turn just as certain to breed other defectors. This is an astonishing quote, especially coming from Margaret Sanger, who fought for birth control and for women, supposedly. And it also factors in with your novel. So talk about this quote for a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you about how this book originated.
Right. So I'm very glad that my editor, Mary Sue Rucci, asked me to write an author's note for this novel. And I was really happy to find that perfect quote, because the novel has a lot of language that is very disturbing to read if you're not immersed in the 1920s, as I was for about 10 years. So those words that Margaret Sanger used were in a book she wrote in 1924. And the words idiot, imbecile, moron, and feeble-minded were actually clinical terms at that time.
That's right. There was a difference.
Right. Feeble-minded was just generally intellectually disabled or intellectually impaired. So, and then morons were pretty high, high functioning, supposedly. Imbeciles were medium, and then idiots would have been like the lowest IQ. IQ tests were very rudimentary at that time, but we'll get to that later. Okay, go ahead. I think, did you have a question, or you want me to?
No, I'm just shaking my head in amazement. I'm loving this. Go ahead.
Well, so yeah, I came across the word feeble-minded when about a decade ago, I did what a lot of people started doing was research. I joined Ancestry.com. I wanted to find out a lot of things about my family. But first, all I wanted to know was how my maternal grandmother became an orphan. I knew she grew up in an orphanage, but I didn't know what happened to her parents. And I still don't know that, although I've been researching this and know a lot about my grandmother that I didn't know before. There's no record of the orphanage where my grandmother lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania. There's no asylum record. There's no record of her at all until 1930, she was 17 years old, and she was working, according to a census record I found, as a stenographer at a place in central Pennsylvania called, according to the census record, the Laurelton State Village for Feeble-Minded Women. I was very shocked. I was turning each page, every page, and it was hundreds of women in this asylum. And so I decided to look that up, and it turned out that wasn't the whole name. That's all they could fit at the top of the census record. The actual official name of the place was the Laurelton State Village for Feeble-Minded Women of Childbearing Age.
Oh my God.
And once I learned that feeble-minded actually wasn't a slur, at that time it became one very quickly, but I learned that it was actually like a medical term. I realized I came to learn that the of childbearing age part was actually the most offensive and actually the most damaging to thousands and thousands of women, because this was a eugenics asylum where my grandmother worked. It was one of hundreds in this country in the early 20th century, and eugenics is probably something you might not know a lot about. And if you don't, you're not alone. We weren't taught about it growing up.
Oh my God, it's unbelievable. It's like, people would be sent to this place if for any number of reasons. If they were gay, if somebody had a child out of wedlock, if somebody simply was old enough and they weren't married, it was criminal. And what's also criminal is the belief that mental illness would always be inheritable and from the woman, never from the father, of course. This book reminded me a little bit of the Magdalena Sisters, which also imprisoned.
It's the same idea. It was for bad girls. It was, I always loved the 1920s. It was, to me, it was this this era of decadence, of free, more like sexual morals loosening. Zelda Fitzgerald or Lee Miller. These were the rich women of the 1920s. They could, if you were from a very wealthy family, you could have sex and not be married. You could drink, even though drinking was illegal. You could run to speakeasies with your friends. You could be a character in a Dorothy Parker story, or hang out with F. Scott and the gang. If you were poor and doing the exact same behaviors, you were a menace to society. And I never knew how dangerous it was to be a woman. Actually, it didn't on all the different socioeconomic levels. Well, there were probably
that's right.
But especially if you were poor, you were very vulnerable because you had the legal status in this country of a child, even though we had the right to vote.
That's right.
So anyway, I found this out, and after thinking I might write actually a nonfiction kind of just journey of discovery, I decided to write a novel.
That's a great idea. Great idea. That's fascinating.
Yeah, because a few characters really that were real characters, historical characters that I found out about that were connected to this asylum where my grandmother worked, really caught my imagination. And the one probably that caught it the most was the real female doctor who ran the place, who was my grandmother's boss, and whom I based the character of Dr. Vogel.
Oh my God, we have to talk about Dr. Vogel.
Yeah, Dr. Vogel. I was blown away. I loved. So she was based on. I shouldn't say based on. I don't want to get. But she was. There were things about the real woman who ran the place where my mother worked that really impressed me. And they were these. She graduated from medical school in 1899 when very few women went to college.
Right. That's right.
She was one of the first female psychiatrists in the United States. She was the head of this asylum that was built specifically for this eugenics movement, which I'll go into more detail in a minute. But it actually wasn't for people with psychiatric illness. It was for people who were morally or mentally defective. And eugenics was, in short, this very promising pseudoscience, which was supposed to cure all of society's ills by encouraging the good, or the successful and intelligent and fit people that have more children, and the unfit to have less. And then that's like positive eugenics. And then in the United States, we very quickly went to negative eugenics, which was forced sterilization, which a lot of people know about. In some states, Pennsylvania was one, forced sterilization was not legal. So they would just, lock up young women of childbearing age. And they weren't there for training. They weren't there for therapy or school. They were there to not have children. They were released when they reached menopause. And some girls were sent there as early as 13.
And what did they do when they were released? So they had been incarcerated forever and now they're out? How can they?
Family. I could go into that. I could go into that later. I could talk about this all day, but yeah, a lot of them floundered once they were out in society, and these were poor women, so they had lived their lives had been taken away. What happened was as I was reading, so back to Dr. Vogel, and then I'll talk about one. So the real one was Dr. Mary Wolfe, and basically Dr. Vogel in the book. I'll just talk about her, but she was very much based on this. At first glance, she's amazing. As I said,
champion of women.
And also Margaret Sanger's come under a lot of criticism, as other people who are people are aware that they actually were eugenicists, which was most people in the 1920s, in the early 20th century. Most people we admire, many people we admire. But I was studying Margaret Sanger. I was reading about this doctor, and that's when I started learning about the limitations of these women. So Dr. Vogel in my book, and the real doctor, she went to medical school. She was a doctor. She ran this asylum. It was a model asylum. There were delegates from other countries that were coming here to study. And guess which one was really interested? Germany, studying about, had to do with like very white Aryan, Nordic perfection, lesser races being inferior. So she was a very successful doctor. She wrote reports for our legislators, for congressmen and senators, to inform them on policy, so they could make policies on public health before she had the right to vote. She was doing that in the 1910s. Then in 1920, when everyone could vote, she had power, but if she had married, which she didn't, if she had married, her husband then would have been her legal guardian, and she would have had the status of a child, as our mothers did until about the 1960s. That's right. In most states, they couldn't have bank accounts. They were in their husband's name. They couldn't have credit cards. And so imagine being a woman with, that much education, that much power. And, but if she were to marry, she was lucky because her father was dead. And so was she never married. If she had a living father, he would be her guardian. He would be in charge of her money. And if she had a grown son, he would be in charge. So that's where we were in the early 20th century. It wasn't that long ago. And this book has nothing to do with Roe v. Wade, which is very much in the headlines now. But I think it was the LA Times actually put that in the headline of a very nice review about the book. But this was all when people were talking, and I don't care, I think anyone will love this no matter what your views are on women's reproductive rights.
Right.
This is about women's right to the autonomy of our right, the right to the autonomy of our own bodies. If not, are we fully considered adults, or are we children? Are we, which we were until the middle of the 20th century? If we're not allowed to decide whether we want or can have children, are we children then? If society gets to make those choices, so that's very much was on my mind when I was writing this. So Dr. Vogel, I realized I think I have to write a novel because I'm very fascinated by this woman. And then Lillian, so there's Mary, Dr. Vogel, and Lillian. Mary's based on my grandmother. She went to work at this asylum. Lillian is her friend who she hadn't seen since they were girls growing up in an orphanage. She sees her there as this beautiful young woman working her, in like a, doing forced, they were like indentured servants working because she had been locked up there for being feeble-minded. Mary remembered Lillian was very smart, but Lillian had a baby out of wedlock, and Lillian's white, and her baby was mixed race. So that her boyfriend was Black. Now, in Pennsylvania, some states allowed interracial marriage, and some states didn't at that time. I believe also Pennsylvania, it wasn't against the law, but you didn't have to break a law to be sent to a place like Laurelton State Village, where my grandmother worked, or any of these others. All you had to do is just step a little bit outside of the social norms or sexual norms of the time. And you didn't need a judge to send you there. If your husband was bored with you, he could send you. If the local social worker noticed that your baby wasn't the right race, you were considered feeble-minded for, basically, anyone at that time, if you had sex and weren't married, that was considered something's wrong with your head. Again, if you were poor, because they were trying to. The idea was they didn't want, in the future there would be no more poor people. There'd be no more criminals. There'd be no more, because all of criminality was connected by these scientists to feeble-mindedness. The idea was, if you commit a crime, you're by definition you're feeble-minded, because if you had a normal mind, you wouldn't commit a crime.
You wouldn't do it. Okay. I want to talk more about Dr. Vogel, because one of the things that also really interested me was, women are always talking about helping other women, and Mary thinks she found the perfect mentor in Dr. Vogel. And in a way, before the layers are peeled away, Dr. Vogel is exemplary. But as Mary begins to type some of the more damning letters that Dr. Vogel puts out, Mary becomes complicit. I want to know this whole idea of mentorship among women, and women helping women, and women hurting women. A lot of that also is based on stereotypes, where people think, my mother told me when I was growing up never to trust my girlfriends, because all they really wanted was to get my boyfriends.
Oh, no.
And I've heard of the women, and my whole thing now is that, women have to help each other. So I wanted to know, when you were writing Dr. Vogel, it felt to me, because she was such a complete person, that you had two ways of feeling about her. You understood why she acted the way she did, even if you didn't approve of it. But then there was this part where I felt like you wanted her to be a mentor, and she was, and she wasn't.
Right.
Can you talk about that? She's so complicated. Interesting.
The reason I love writing that, I don't think we have in popular culture, in fiction, in films, or on television, very great female anti-heroes. Everyone wants to play that as a part. But it's always men that get to be Walter White and his wife. Right. Hand lotion on. I watched Breaking Bad again recently. The wife sits by the bed putting hand lotion. I've never put hand lotion on in my life. But I wanted to, first of all, I wanted to bring the reader to Dr. Vogel the way I came to the real doctor, and be impressed with her, and see that she really part of her really wanted to help women, and actually really protect them from. Poor women were very vulnerable. Men did prey on them. Poor women in Pennsylvania, where there are a lot of coal mining, a lot of industry happening, poor women were forced into prostitution. They were taken advantage of. But so I saw that. But this book is really very fundamentally about two things: female friendships, but also about motherhood, and lack of mother, and the denial of motherhood. So Mary has no mother, and that is a profound void in her.
Right.
Too. And it's she kind of has, Mary comes into the world with nobody who loves her, but she's, I think she thinks she's okay. But Dr. Vogel is a psychiatrist. She's very clever, and she's the kind of person that would find a person's little weak spot, and if she's a manipulative person, which we might find out she is, might use that to her advantage. But Mary, of course, is very impressed. Imagine living in a time when women couldn't, again, own their own. They had no rights to eat their own children. And then this woman, and she really was, the real woman she was amazing. She traveled all over the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania giving speeches that were published in the Philadelphia Inquirer. She was published herself. What wasn't there to be to admire? And again, as I said, the eugenics wasn't I think some early readers, that's another reason I did the forward. Early readers thought this was like some kind of hate group, like maybe the Proud Boys or like Ku Klux Klan.
Oh, really? Wow.
And it was everyone from Theodore Roosevelt to Winston Churchill, because it was an international thing. Virginia Woolf, H.G. Wells. Most people were for eugenics, and it was, again, as I said, it was the law of the land. The Immigration Act of 1924 was a eugenics law. That was the law that if you were it was called an Origins Act law, but it was one that kept basically Anne Frank from being able to come here when she wanted it. It started excluding everyone who wasn't really white, like from Northern or Western Europe, from coming here. Anyway.
Wow. Well, no, because I thought it was very, the remark you made about Walter White, it's true, because Dr. Vogel, you understand her. There's nothing she does that you think, oh my God, I can't believe she did. I mean, it's totally understood in her character. And in that way, she would be a great character to play, because she's so interesting and so flawed and so real. And she tips the scales both ways, good and bad, which I love.
I really wanted to be careful to not make her the stereotypical, like,
she wasn't
beautiful. Like, she's not this stereotypical, like, ward matron. She's beautiful. She's smart. And I think she did care. And I think she also was corrupt. I think power corrupts. And
you can be both things.
Time of corruption everywhere. It was prohibition. Everyone was engaged in corruption who had any power. And so, well, she might have been too. You'll find out if you read the book.
So this is your first historical novel. Did you find when you were writing this that your imagination was saying, well, I know this is true, but what if I made it this way to make it more dramatic? How difficult was it, and how exhilarating both?
I actually found it, I really loved it, because I actually found a problem I ran into that I think a lot of people who write historical fiction run into is I really get into the research. So I would get so into every detail. And that's where, once I had a draft and my editor saw it, she really had, this was a much longer book. And she was like, okay, so this might be fascinating to you. The interior of an automobile looked in I had to know every detail, like exactly, did they make their underwear? How did they make their underwear?
I would be interested in that too.
I didn't have, all that didn't go in the book, but I had to know it to write the book. And then I could, but yeah, so I actually really enjoyed being in that time. I read a lot of books. I didn't read books written about that time. I read a lot of books written during that time. One book I think that was quite connected to this book, Theodore Dreiser's An American Tragedy. Most people know it with Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift, called The Place in the Sun. But he wrote I think it was the foreword of that book, or maybe when he was writing about that book, he wrote the book because he said he had noticed all these newspaper articles about young men that were killing their girlfriends when they found out they were pregnant, and it was happening. And I saw headlines like this too when I was reading newspaper articles. And he wrote a really interesting book about that. So it was a thing. And so I read, but I read books that were written then because I really wanted to get a real sense of the dialogue, really the way people spoke. They spoke in a different cadence. They had different slang. I didn't want to write a book that somebody, living now thought the way they thought. So I felt it helpful to be really in the time, and people weren't any different. This Mary is based on my grandmother. She was 18 years old. She wanted to have fun when she wasn't working. She was running off with her friends to this, to the dance hall, the speakeasy. She had fun. There is fun in this book. I had to make it. It's the jazz age. It's like, it had to be fun.
Right.
Yeah. I had to I would think of what would I have been like if I were that age at that time, but this was the difference. I had to think what my grandmother was like, and I didn't know my grandmother very well. Last time I saw her, I was 8 years old, and she lived till I was in my 30s, but she and my mother became estranged. Wow. My grandmother's very unwell from her trauma of her whole life. I knew little about her. I knew she had a sense of humor. But I also remember one time when I was pestering my mother, as I often was, like, tell me what was wrong with her. Tell me about her. And my mother thought hard and said, this is what was wrong with her. Nobody ever loved her whole life. Nobody loved her. And that so informed me. So
Wow.
that was able, that helped me with Mary, because I wrote it in the first person. I did another version that wasn't in the first person, but she's the narrator, and I really like bringing, I've known people who have been in denial about their vulnerability, that want to bring kind of a strong kind of front wherever they go. And I really kind of understood that. I just really want to explore that. And I'm glad I knew that about her. I'm glad my mother knew that. I don't know much about my grandmother, but I know she worked in this place. She was very,
That's amazing.
and she had a sense of humor, even though she was.
So this brings me to the question about, I always want to know how writers figure out the structure of their book, because I can never figure out why. This book was perfectly structured. I loved the way it was told. No, I'm serious. I'm serious. I look at books that way. And I looked at your book and I thought, this is like, how did you do this? So what I wanted to know is, did the structure find you, or did you instantly know that this is the structure that I want, then I want this to happen, then I want this to happen?
I had the plot, and that's another thing. I usually finding like writing characters is easier, and then plot is harder. That's another thing I realize I would probably like to write another novel that's an historical novel, because the time frame itself gives structure, right? So
Right, right.
so there was that, but no, I kind of had an idea. Well, so basically, the Lillian character, who's her friend, who's the inmate, I came to her because I was reading decades. So the census records come out every 10 years. So I'd read about they called them girls even when they were 30. So a girl who was like admitted when she was 18 years old in 1920. She was there when she was 28, when she was 38. It broke my heart. I saw records, newspaper archives of mothers trying to get their daughters out, doing habeas corpus appeals through the courts. She's not, she made a mistake. She's not feeble-minded, and they were not released, and it broke my heart. And so all these girls I started reading about, they kind of came together as Lillian, and Lillian, who's there against her will. And Mary's kind of dilemma is she's so kind of bought into this idea of, Lillian was working in a really kind of a dangerous place, and she did have a child out of wedlock, which was very, very not okay in those days. And in those days, the racism in that time was not, there were no dog whistles. It was in headlines of newspapers. So all of it would have made, it made Mary wonder, well, maybe Lillian isn't okay. But then slowly there's this, I like to have like an unreliable narrator, and we come to think that maybe Mary has something she's very ashamed of. And I just really wanted it throughout there, Lillian and Mary, like they could have been swapped. It was like there, but for the grace of God, go out, because they have the same background. It was just, one misstep here, one lucky break here, and there they are. So
did you map it out? Do you have like index cards? Or?
So I really, the plot was okay, but I couldn't come up with an ending. When I
really, oh my God.
I said, here it is. The ending is awful. And then the ending was awful for, I'm not kidding, 3 years. 3 years it took. I mean,
why? Without giving anything away? Why was it awful? It's just
every ending I wrote was horrible. It was horrible. Like it was horrible. And then there was just like this sense of, one was, I tell you, one was just not satisfying. One was just too sad. One was silly. One was outright, it became like, it went from like this really like intense novel that was, moved and gripping and everything, to Keystone Cops. It became like a cartoon, like at the end. And then,
so how did the ending come to you?
I have to, kudos to, again, Mary Sue Rucci, my editor, made me make it right. And so we made, I thought it would have been published a couple of years ago, but I'm glad it wasn't. And then, the COVID came. So it was just published last week. And I'm really glad that she, that it really was the ending I worked on most of the time. It was the ending, and I'm happy with it now.
Do you feel from all your other amazing books that you learned lessons that you could apply to the next book, or do you feel like, no, every book is a new book and it's all a nightmare until it isn't?
Oh yeah, no, they're always a nightmare until they aren't, and you always learn lessons. Like, right? Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I think you're right. I was hoping you were going to say that, and you did.
Yeah, I mean, what do you feel? Like, how do you?
I feel the same way. I feel the same way. I always think, okay, I did this, I learned a lesson. Then I start a new book and I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. Is it too late to go to dental school?
You know what I love
Um,
is that you tweet stuff like that, or you post it, and I love it. You are
because it's honest.
more of a Twitter or a Facebook. Where do I see you the most? Because I'm all over
Twitter, mostly
Twitter.
Twitter.
You just
Twitter's really
like,
fast.
I don't know what I'm. I love that you do these tweets of I'm scared. Like, or this is in front of me, or you just sent it to your editor, and I love that you share that with everybody because people
Oh,
don't.
it's constant. Well, I've come to embrace my anxiety. So, but wait, I want to talk about you. I want to talk about what was it like having The Good House turn into a film? What is it like to see your story become a film from more modern love? Does it feel like it's still yours, or does it feel strange, or um, do you ever want to be like, say, a waitress in one of them and have a cameo where you can say, "Are
Actually,
you going to order?"
in The Good House, I don't even want to draw people's attention to it because okay, my husband's an actor. I've been around actors all my life, but I should know, like, don't look at the camera. And they actually said to me, because they invited me to the set. They shot it up in Nova Scotia, but it's supposed to look like in New England. They were like, it'd be really cool if you just walked through this bar. What do I do? I walk through and there's the camera. So I'm like walking. It's look right. And I thought, well, they'll cut it out. And sure enough, when they sent me a screening, it was terrible. I ruined the movie. I ruined my movie. But no, I feel like the adaptation that I wrote a book, and then the filmmakers wrote a movie. I didn't write the screenplay, and they had their own vision. And I loved what they did with it. And same with Modern Love. Modern Love, your piece was made into one of your Modern Loves was made into a.
No, it wasn't made into a movie. It was. I did get a Modern Love, which was fabulous, and Ruth Negga read it, which was fabulous.
Okay.
And it never went and made the final step because they thought it was too weird. Which I take as a compliment.
No, I love your Modern Love though. So no, that was also so okay. So a Modern Love essay, how many words is it? 1,200, 10, 1,000?
Like, it's less than that. I think it's 900 and something.
Okay, so and it's a half-hour thing. So the I think Sharon Horgan directed it, and I'm not sure if she must have written it too. I didn't write the adaptation, but they had to write a half an hour long thing. So they really expanded on it. It really had, it certainly had elements of the original essay, but my daughter's feelings were hurt because she always, we've got 2 kids, and she always felt like my son was the golden child. How they,
yeah.
The kid in the movie had my son's name, but she had a name that she and I had taken. Anyway, it was fun. It was super fun. Come on, Tina Fey played and John.
I know, it was incredible. It was just, I can't imagine. That's incredible. I actually have 2 more questions for you, but I want to make time for questions from listeners. So, Ollie, what do we have?
Ollie?
Okay, well, while we're waiting for Ollie, I will ask you. This is one of my favorite questions. What's obsessing you now, Ann, and why?
What's obsessing me now?
Yeah, and why?
I'm still obsessing about
beside politics, something different.
No. I'm not. Yeah, I look away. No, I'm obsessed with genealogy. Well, I'm obsessed with many things, but I'm really upset. I went down this genealogy rabbit hole. I'm in all these like communities online, in these forums and these subreddits about genealogy. And there's still a big puzzle. There's a big mystery in my mother's side of the family that I've been trying to solve the whole time I've been writing this book. And so I am going to I'm going to solve that mystery before I die. And it involves, I'm quite confident I have the smoking gun. It involves a murder. And so I'm going to be researching that. Now, I did an event last night with Maud Newton, who wrote Ancestor Trouble. And so much fun. We were at the Center for Fiction together. So as you know, she wrote a nonfiction book, which was brilliant. And it was a mixture of a memoir and also like a journalistic study in genetics. And she has a very problematic ancestry, which involved, she's from the South and slave owning. So we talked after the event a lot about, she knows a lot about looking and, how to find out forensic genealogy.
Fascinating.
And there's people in the, like there's a whole community of people that are really into this. So
yeah, it's incredible.
yeah.
It's just incredible. So what kind of writer are you? Do you write every day? Do you have rituals? Do you have to have the same music? Do you have to be in a room with the door closed? The animals with you?
Quiet room. I can't listen to music when I write, but anything. Well, I could just, no. I write in the morning. I write early. I write until like early afternoon, and then I really like my confidence kind of wanes, and everything I write seems really dumb, and I have to put it away. But I often think about it. I will say something I've learned, and probably you did, with like maybe I don't know which book, but at some point I did learn this trick, which I think all writers should know, and most probably do. I try not to stop when I'm stuck. I try to.
Right.
The place to stop is when you're cooking along, because that's when I really work. Sometimes I could work till 8 o'clock at night if the story's start to write itself, as you know it does. Sometimes it's really working. That's when to stop, because then the next morning you can't wait to get back in, and it works. But if you stop when you're stuck, the next morning you go to a place of like the doldrums, like in Moby Dick, when
we're still. No, you have to, even if it's like one good sentence that you left behind. So you have it.
Something, a little something.
Do you share your work with people before it gets to your agent?
No, I do. I have a couple friends. My friend Laura Zigman is somebody I share.
She's coming on here. She's going.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we're sharing her.
Very good, and she's actually going to start. She does this. She's starting a business of like writing therapy, and I think she should. You probably know. Besides being a very successful novelist, she's been a very successful ghostwriter for some very important people.
I did not know that. That's incredible.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that. That's great.
So, anyway, you'll be hearing more about it because she's going to be setting up a website and everything. But so yeah, Laura, and then my husband, but yeah, I don't like to show people, because they'll only read it once. You can't,
right?
So I don't want to send it when it's kind of sucky, because then they're going to be like, oh yeah, I'll read it again, and it's still. So I wait until because I don't. It's too much to ask a person to read something more than once, unless it's your editor. It's their job.
Right. Okay, so one last question, which is, what question didn't I ask that I should have asked you? Or that you'd like to talk about?
Oh, that was the question? Oh, I thought you were about to read me a question.
Oh, yeah, I am reading the question, but that's the question. What question didn't Caroline, ask?
What did we ask that we should have asked? I've been doing, I've spent like the last 6 years like writing this book in my little room, only talking about animals. And then I've been every day this week at a different place, driving from place to place and talking about the book. So much so that in the middle of a talk, I've stopped and said, wait, did I say that before? So I have no idea. Everything you asked was amazing. And I don't know if I made any sense to you.
You did. It was fascinating. There's one more question that came up, which is, did you interview people for this book who had this experience? And what was that like?
Well, okay. So the Eugenics Era, and if you want to know more about it, watch PBS did an American Experience episode called the Eugenics Crusade. It explains it much better than I did. It was we don't know about it, but it was very widespread. It was a household word in the early 20th century. The reason we don't know about it is because eugenics ended with World War II. The final solution of eugenics is the Holocaust, and that's what the world saw, and everyone saw what happens. First, you take if you decide, you can decide this person should be sterilized against their will or locked up. So what's the next step? Are they really human then? So then, so that's why. So there weren't any women really alive when I started really researching this that were part of the eugenics part of it. But I did meet and speak to many people who worked there for years, because like most of these places, it went through lots of reforms, and it was open until the 1990s. It turned into an actual training school.
1990s it was open?
What?
It was open until the 1990s?
Yeah. So I know people,
wow.
It's a very rural part of Pennsylvania. It was a huge employer for the community. And I've talked to people who loved the individuals who they took care, because it became a place for people who really did have profound intellectual disabilities, and they loved the people. It broke their heart when it closed, and I enjoyed hearing that part of it too, hearing about what it became. Its institutions are never perfect, and
Right.
it's hard. There's many hard things about institutions, but what I found out were there were thousands of acts of kindness in the place, probably throughout, even in the worst times.
That's fascinating. It's you have to write a nonfiction book about this stuff too, because it's so fascinating. I want to show the gorgeous.
I don't like footnotes. I'm too disorganized, so I can't.
Okay, here's the gorgeous cover again of The Foundling by Ann Leary. Bookshop.org or your favorite indie bookstore. It's a remarkable book. It's so readable and so fascinating and so much fun and also so important and so serious. And I want to thank everybody who's here, and I especially want to thank Ann Leary for being here. This is so much fun. I hardly had to do any work because you did all the incredible talking and bringing up all these wonderful points. And anytime you want to come back, this is your home.
I'd love to. And thank you for doing this. I'm glad that you do the Mighty Blaze. I've loved it since you started it, and I thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. You're very, very welcome. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next. And Ann, stay on, and we're going to end the broadcast now.